to the Teachers Pep Rally. If you missed our last episode with Anjali Beverly about collaboration and inclusivity, please go back and check it out. Before introducing our guests for this episode, we want to give a warning for this episode because we're talking about death and suicide. This is something that might be too difficult to listen to at this time or triggers extra anxiety or stress for you because of past experiences. Please do what is best for you, and that may be to not listen to this episode at this time. Our guest today is an elementary educator and has written a book titled A Marshland of His Own to tell his story of losing a friend to suicide. So please welcome to the Teachers Pep Rally, Gavin Zastrow, also known as Z.
Hey,
Hey, Gavin. So happy to have
in the
you.
house.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Great. Well, as I mentioned, you wrote a book and it is your story. Do you mind, before we get into the nitty gritty of our conversation, just giving us a little bit about that story so we have some background?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The book that I wrote, A Marshland of His Own, I wrote it when I was in high school. My junior year in high school, a friend of mine committed suicide, and he wasn't it wasn't like a best friend. It was a classmate. So we were a big class, about 300-400 kids. And we had grown up, played soccer together, gone to grade school together. So we knew each other. But, you know, when you get to high school, you kind of go your own separate ways. And when he committed suicide our junior year, it didn't hit me immediately as it hit everyone else. It took me a couple of days to kind of get hit with it. And then when going through that whole process and grieving and everything, it just kind of stuck with me. And it stuck with a lot of us because we had to kind of learn how to deal with that horrific event for us. And about a year later, I was writing what I thought at the time of the book, even publishing the book, was a short story. But it turned out, as I've gotten back into contact with the teacher that helped me through this, that it was some journaling that I was doing. And I was kind of trying to process my feelings a year later. Again, even we weren't, really close, but I mean, we were classmates and we knew each other. And I was still holding on to those feelings like a year later. And the ironic thing is, the teacher that I kind of went to, I showed up at her door. I had never had her as a teacher. She doesn't know to this day why I showed up at her room. I don't know why I showed up at her room. And she helped me take that journaling and start kind of refining it and writing it and turning it into a novel, because she was really close with all of our class as far as counseling us through the events of the previous year. And she wanted to have a resource for the guidance office. And so we kind of started working in tandem, and we created this really nice book detailing a lot of memories that were written from my high school point of view. And then I tried to get it published, and then went on with life and started teaching, and kind of all the way and fast forward, it was 26 years later. Well, 25 years later, and I ran into somebody at work who had just self-published a book, and they kind of gave me the person's name, and they said, "Hey, go to Orange Hat, and I think they would have an interest in this." And I was able to financially afford it. We kind of got to that point, and we started going through, and it took about a year to kind of get it in place. And as we started going through and editing it, it was something that we couldn't make some of the changes they wanted. We couldn't make because I couldn't remember, because it was 25 years in my past, and reading it, it's like reading something out of the past that was an event from 25 years ago. So there's some details they wanted that I couldn't give them, and they made grammatical edits, but they kind of tried to stay true to what I did with that high school teacher 25 years earlier. And as a result, we've got this like really, really strong piece of what somebody who's left behind after a suicide and doesn't really know what to do with the feelings they have. You have that process of them going through it, but what's unique is it's in the voice of a high schooler. So I guess that's the short version. I can give you long versions or short versions.
That's awesome.
I'm one of those guys. But I figure that's a pretty good overview.
I'll say, guys, that is exactly what drew me to Gavin and his story. I mean, we met on LinkedIn, And just the idea of having this teacher, just another reminder of how pivotal we are in the lives of our students, to help him through that process or the class. And then for him to kind of have the wherewithal to journal his feelings, for our teachers out there that are incorporating journaling. It's just such a powerful tool. So thank you, Gavin, for sharing that snapshot with us.
And thank you guys for having me on. I'm real excited to promote the message of this book, because I really think it's an important message. And I think it's often something that a lot of people, it becomes almost, they don't want to deal with it. I know I've talked to a few other people through the process of publishing this. I've had a lot of people reach out to me that were in my class that said, thank you for writing that. We didn't even know that you had those feelings, like, that type of things. And there's other people who are like, yeah, it really traumatized me. This is my story. And on publication, I started getting stories from some people. I'd wake up to some pretty heavy texts from some people that I hadn't heard from in 25 years. And then it's just a message that seemed to resonate with a lot of people. But then the interesting part was it started growing outside of that. I was telling Tisha in one of the interviews coming up to this that her and I have never met before this, and now I'm getting to share the message of the book with the four of you and all your listeners. And I think that shows that it has a universal appeal that can be really helpful to a lot of people. My goal is just that if it can help one person, if it can help a couple people, but it shows the importance that, 25 years ago I was a kid. There's so much that's happened in my life since then, and the things that probably seemed like problems back then. There's people in my life now that I would have never even thought, even had an inkling that they'd be in my life now at that time. Right. And it gives you a really a global look at things, I guess. And I really like how it's just kind of snapshotted in that time period and gives you that high school voice, because there's so many high schoolers that have to deal with this. And when you go to deal with it, when I was a kid, there's Catcher in the Rye and talked a little bit about it. And other than that, there was nothing that you could really go to. There was nothing for you. And it was like, talk to a couple counselors and then you kind of move on and you just kind of put those feelings away. And I think having a tool for kids to be able to create some conversations with people, because they don't know what they need to talk about, but they need to talk about something. I think this is maybe a tool that can get them there.
That was the first question. I know that we're going to get into addressing some of the broader topics of this topic, the broader aspects of this topic. But I think the one thing that's the neat takeaway when I hear you say that you were journaling and then you had the conversation with your assistants who were helping you edit and you couldn't fill in those gaps. Maybe can you just clarify that process just a little bit? Because I've had conversations with people and I was trying to figure that out for myself. I would like to be able to kind of package something up derived from some journaling or some writing that I've done in the past. And I always ask, is there a process that you can go through that helps you resurface memories? I mean, like when there's an autobiographer coming in and they're interviewing somebody or however they do that, did you have to go through anything like that? So was that teacher that was there then 25 years ago, are they still with us? Did you get to have that conversation, or what was that process like to kind of help fill in those gaps?
Yeah. The teacher that helped me 25 years ago, I actually had fallen out of touch with, and in the process of publishing the book, Mary Jo Newberg, I wanted to make sure I could use her name, and I reached out to her and she said I could leave it in there as the teacher who helped me. And then so I went through that with her and she would ask me, as a teacher does, like, what's going on? Why are you writing about this? What are you doing? And she just kept pulling things out, and she would say, well, okay, why'd you decide you brought me a chapter on this now, as she's got me starting to go. And like, why'd you bring me a chapter on this? What was this? And she kind of edited it and kind of helped me work through it, because I was a high school kid. And she just kept, okay, all right, well, is this the end of it, or is there more? Well, no, there's more. I remember that. Remember when you came to the house and talked to all of us, and she would say, yeah, oh yeah, well, okay, and what do you think about that? And she'd trigger a few things. I mean, it was only a year after the event, so for me at that time, that was still pretty fresh. I mean, it was compartmentalized, and I could write that. Like now, I wouldn't, if it wasn't down, I'd have a really hard time remembering the details and things that are in there. So that's what I mean by clarifying that process. And a year later, she could ask me those leading questions and probably get some of that information out of me that was still floating around in me. And it was in some of that journaling that I had been doing. 25 years later, when I was actually going through it with the publishers, that information, a lot of it, what wasn't written on paper was, it's gone. I mean, you remember it, but not in the detail that it's in the book. And I think that's the catch. Did that answer your question, Fred? I'm not
sure. No. It's a tough process. It's a tough process. It sounds like, but it's still wonderful. It obviously happened for a reason. So, I mean, the whole coming of this whole coming together of your book, it had the right pieces and everything is there. And it was just a matter of bringing it together for some very important reasons.
Yeah. And I'm firmly believing this is one of the big things in the process of publishing the book. When I first started doing it, it was like, this was something that I did was really cool 25 years ago. And at the time of publishing it, I was like, I did something really cool. I want to publish it. And and I kind of working through it. It was still a little bit about me, like I want to do this, I want to do this for me. Look at what I did. Look at what's on my mantle. If I go ahead and heart attack the next day, I want something to like solidify that this was there. I don't want it to get wasted because it was good. And then on publication, with the way people reached out to me and just the way that I got to publication, it felt like there was some divine intervention in there on how things happened. And then as people started telling me their story, I started realizing this had nothing to do with me. I was just a vessel. This is a message, and it's a really a strong message. And it's something that resonates with so many people that when they start telling me their stories, I was really humbled. And I mean, the hard part was I'm not trained to be a counselor or anything like that, but I started hearing people's stories and getting into their backgrounds. And at book signings, it'd be like I'd be signing a book and they'd be telling me their story. And it was an adjustment for me as an adult to kind of accept that. But eventually what I did learn is that the message is so solid, so strong, and so important that it's bigger than anything that I intended it to be when I just decided to throw it out and pull it off the shelf and kind of put it into publication.
Which I think, Gavin, you bring up some really great points, and I don't want us to go down a rabbit hole, but it's almost, and this is what I hear from you, it's almost like you had to die to yourself in order for you to truly appreciate the mission, which is to help others, right? Like it's not until you took yourself out of the equation and really realized that this was about others and not you, which is just such an interesting concept to me. It makes me wonder how many of us have books on the inside of us and they don't come to pass because we're in the way of the mission. And so I'm certainly glad you got out of the way, sir. Glad you got out of the way. Amazing.
And the one thing when you were telling the story too, it got me thinking when you said, there was this teacher that you didn't have, but for some reason you felt drawn to going to them. I've seen that happen a lot. I mentioned that you are an educator. So you can probably relate now to that as well. But there's just something sometimes about, you just never know what a kid thinks about you, or just your presence or your demeanor or your tone. In between classes, are you standing at your doorway, not just to greet the kids that are coming into your class, but also, the ones that are walking in the hall. You just don't know what kind of opportunity you're providing for a kid who needs you or feels like that they can go to you about something. So that was kind of an interesting part of that story. And the fact that you were able to reach back out to her, that had to be really kind of special.
It really has been. I mean, we'll text back and forth now every once in a while, and she actually, I teach in a small community right by where I went to school there, and we had left all the community names out of it to make the book universal. So, but in the process of doing that and keeping it close, she actually ended up she lives in the district that I currently teach in, and she was neighbors to kids I'm teaching. And, it's kind of, that's how close we were. So, I mean, it's just, and it was really cool just to hear the effect that she knows I'm having on kids in the community, that parents and things tell her that I don't know that I'm having as a teacher. As you said, sometimes you don't know you have connections with students, and then people tell you how connected you are, and it's humbling. I mean, it really, but it makes you realize there's a greater purpose to what we do. And sometimes it's just kind of, it takes 25 years for that purpose to come out. So,
which is fine. And I love, Aaron, that you brought up that point. I always believed that all of the children were mine, not just the ones on my roster, right? But I'll never forget, very recently, I have a young lady that works on my website, and she happened to have graduated from where Aaron taught. And she talked about Aaron like she had her the whole time in high school. And when I finally asked, and come to find out, this young lady never had Aaron as a teacher, but talked about her like she did. And that was because a great friend of the student had Aaron. And so she would inadvertently became part of Aaron's community. And so Aaron impacted her without even knowing that she was impacting her in that way, which, really goes back to our topic tonight, right? Like, these are great opportunities to watch behavior and notice if certain kids are lingering around our classrooms and things like that, because we can many times be the first responders, right? The first ones to notice how our kids are doing. So that power of relationship, Aaron, you're right on it with that.
Yeah.
That's that was what I was going to ask too. So, you're such a small community and you're writing about a very sensitive topic. We've all experienced it to some degree, suicide, and I've had it occurred with students. If you don't mind me asking, how did the family receive the book? Have you been in touch with the family?
Yeah, this was one point that my publisher was very clear on when we did decide to put it into print. Let me go back. When I originally wrote it and we created those copies for the guidance office, I vaguely remember, and it's hard, and I've talked with the teacher who helped me, and we're still kind of not exactly sure because we both are kind of vaguely remembering this. But we vaguely remember giving a copy to the family and saying, are you okay with this if we put a couple copies into the guidance office? And then fast forward 25 years, and when it was published, one of the first things my publisher had me do was they had me say, you have to reach out to the family and you have to find out if you can use the real names or if you need to change names. We recommend that, you kind of take the town name out of it and try to make it as universal as possible. But if they're okay with using the name, because it was kind of essential to the title, because his last name was Marsh, so Marshland of his own, it was kind of, you have to kind of get that permission. And his brother still is in town. His brother's an eye doctor in town. So I had to run up to his office and I dropped off a copy and kind of got his blessing and had him talk with his parents and just say, is it okay if we use the real names, or do we need to change some names? And, and tip you off when I'm going to send this out. It probably won't do much, but in case it does, it's going to, I want you to be aware so you don't see it on Facebook or something like that and kind of start, you be caught off guard. And he said, he gave me the family's blessing and said, yep, go ahead and do it. We're good for it. And he's like, I'll help you promote it, which that was a powerful part for me too, because all the way going through publishing this, I almost had a feeling like it was something I shouldn't be making public. We had written it 25 years ago, but it was almost like something I felt almost a little like guilty, like trying to put it out there. And having him say, no, this is a message that needs to be told, after he read it, really was powerful. That I remember that being one of the turning points in the publishing process for me, where I really started having that change in my thinking about the message in the book and how I wanted the book to become our book and not my book and things like that. And so the community, the other thing to your point was the community. I was real worried because I wasn't a close friend of his, what his close friends that were classmates of mine would think when I published it. And some of the texts that I've received from some of those people, or emails or face-to-face conversations, really kind of gave me they thanked me for doing it. They thanked me for putting it out there. A lot of them didn't know that I was so profoundly affected. Like, people just didn't know, because you don't know, because people just kind of go on and do what they do. And so I was received very positively. That was a long answer to a short question, but I tend to give long answers. I'm kind of a rambler.
No, and I appreciate you too. I appreciate that answer so much, and because it's a tough question to ask, actually. And I was hesitant because I was thinking about the tribes that we build and everything like that. But I think when I hear you say that, this book is a healing vehicle. It's doing so many things on so many levels over time. It's just beautiful. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's also,
which is why to me that.
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry,
Go ahead, Erin.
I was going to say, it's also leaving a footprint of a life that was lived, right? And in a way, you're keeping your friend's memory, or the fact that they were of this earth alive in some way. And I also think that, like everyone keeps talking about community, even the fact that it wasn't your best friend even makes it even more impactful for me, because Letitia and I have talked in the past before about certain places that build community. And I think that we, as a society, have moved away from that, or we forget how much a school is part of a community. And so, when someone passes, whether it's a teacher in the building, a student, or someone's even parent that you hear about, it impacts us all, because we all, either have kids or students, or we all know a teacher. And so it just kind of reminds us of how precious life really is. At least that's what I'm kind of thinking as I'm listening to everyone talking about this.
Yeah.
That's absolutely, you're hitting it on the head there. And I think, to Fred's point, the timing of this, I know, Gavin, you joke about the 25 years. I think timing is everything. And I think that because you waited, and because it was just right, to Fred's point, the healing, it's like the entire community needed permission to heal. And you gave them that permission. I mean, 25 years, and it impacted you. I'm thinking about the folks that were his best friend.
Yeah.
Right. Or his own family. You have given your community permission to heal. And now future generations will know that they don't need to suppress how they feel. They don't, because they almost have a book, right? If they have no one else to listen, they can at least grab your book and have their feelings validated. So I think this is just a beautiful, beautiful tribute to not only the life we lost, but to Erin's point, the footprint he left, and that now your community can heal.
Yeah. And kind of continuing with that healing theme, the artwork in the book was all done by a friend of mine who, another friend in our class. And he lived down the road from us, and it was the artwork by my parents' house where I grew up. And it's all houses now. It's not there, but he hand drew it and did all that type of stuff. And because I'm not an artist, and he went through and he kind of created that. And then he's been diagnosed with, I believe it's MS. And so he can no longer draw or do any artwork. And it was right. His I don't know what you call it, an ailment or what, but his condition was kind of really kind of starting to settle in life. And when this was published, I was able to ask him, can we use your artwork? And he was able to say, yeah, that's great. And I don't get to draw anymore because of this or that. So it was a tribute to something that he had done 25 years earlier. That was like, wow. And and so I got one of my pictures on my wall downstairs is, because one of my good friends is his brother-in-law now, is the three of us. On the day that it got published, I hand delivered his book, and he's in his wheelchair, and me and my buddy are on his sides, and he's holding the book. And he's so excited about having his artwork in there, being part of the message and being able to push it forward. The actual artwork on the front of the book is the publisher took what he did and decorated it and kind of cleaned it up and kind of created it. But the actual chapter headings are the publishing company took the artwork that he did and kind of put it at the top of each page so that his legacy would live on within it too. So that was a really cool component that came out of it that I never expected when I was just going to the publisher and trying to get the book out there. So
wow.
Wow.
Story. Jeez.
I can't. You held back on me, buddy. I talked
Yeah.
to you twice.
Letitia, we only talked for like an hour. I have lots of stories. I mean, it's been
Oh.
yeah.
You know, and
That's
it's
amazing.
interesting because I'm sitting here thinking about, I'm thinking a lot about Pete actually, because Pete is in the music and the arts and the performing arts, and writing is a great outlet for therapy or just to kind of de-stress or let some things out or think things through. And artwork, drawing was mine as a kid. I drew a lot as a kid. Singing, I imagine, Pete.
Yeah. I talk to my students a lot about, if I'm torturing them with a classical piece of music or something, and I say, they see what year it was written. We learn about that, and they think how far, and then we put into context, who was president, what was happening in the country, what was the invention during that time, or even further back into history, and we try to make it real for them. And then I talk to them about how I said, think about that. There's nothing remaining of Antonio Corelli except this piece of music now. When you create something, a part of you does live on forever. And that's a big part of what I try to push onto them in a good way in our classroom. It doesn't matter what it is, and it doesn't matter where the creativity comes from. I admire you, sir, for just having the courage to take some of these big steps to get this out, to get it created, to do it in such a respectful way to the family, to your community. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a heavy topic for me. Suicide has touched my family, and as a teacher, and also as at a company I used to work at. So I've been touched by it 3 times. So I'm a little bit more quiet than usual tonight, but my heart is full, and I'm amazed at what you're doing. You're a beautiful person for what you're doing, and I hope this inspires other teachers, because we're around these kids a lot. Very often we're around these kids more than their own family members. And, if you teach for any period of time, sooner or later, something like this could very well touch you. And we need to think about how to handle that, because that's a lot for us to put in on top of everything else in our wheelhouse. And I hope your story inspires others to do something like create something out of the pain, and to have something live on forever and in the most healthy way possible. There's no downside to any of this. So bravo to you, sir. Thank you.
And thank you for the kind words. That's really heartfelt, and I'm humbled. Again, these are the types of things I hear that I'm just, it's the message of the book. It's not
right. It's beautiful.
So I'm wondering, Gavin, how has this journey impacted the way that you teach, or the way that you kind of build your relationships with your students? Has it changed it at all?
Well, there's this little thing going on in the world called COVID that has really changed a lot of mental health. Yeah, I don't know if you heard about it at all. It's been out there, and it's interesting because to me, it's another one of those timing pieces, because I finished this all up. I mean, 25 years ago was a couple years ago now, so this was all pre-pandemic when it kind of was released. And the process of going back and kind of going through this really kind of made me start thinking about students as I'm older, and starting to think about just how much of an effect teachers have on us, how much of an effect the mental health aspect gets in the way of learning sometimes, and even whether we know it or not. And going through COVID, going from a teacher who was not very technologically sound and really was fearful when we went into this pandemic thing. Like, oh, you mean I got to teach kids on a computer? And I was a little freaked out about that. And learning how to develop relationships through that, and then coming back and seeing them again in person, because we've been in person most of this year, maybe 2-3 days we haven't been. How important knowing what's going on with these kids is to understanding why they're doing what they're doing in the room in front of you. It's been a journey again. Everything's been a journey. And when I was younger, I kind of forgot about the lessons that I learned here. And as my career has gotten older and older and older, each year I start realizing more and more the importance of being the relationships with this. I always know relationships are important with the students, but these last couple of years have really kind of made that more pronounced. So this, I think, was the jumping point into COVID for me almost. So it's kind of, it was a good way to remind me of that going into the whole experience. I don't know if that answered your question. Again, I'm kind of long-winded.
I think it did. Yeah, it's highlighting that social and emotional part is so important, and we've been talking a lot about this at the beginning of the school year with COVID. We said the most important thing this year is human connections, right? I mean, academics are great, but the most important thing is probably the human connections. And I don't know if a lot of people know, but the second leading cause of death for teenagers, or at least adolescents to young adults, so 15 to 24 years old, is suicide. Second leading cause of death. That's scary. That's scary. And so I can only imagine now, even during COVID, I'm sure the numbers have gone up because there's just been so much isolation, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've heard those. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Fred.
No, I was just going to say, we hear these stories and we're seeing these numbers and they're horrific. When we hear the age and then the event of them taking their lives, it's a stressful time. And I think for teachers, like you had said, I think Pete, you had said, or I forget who mentioned it. I think we're all kind of saying it. We're part of their community. We see them so much.
Right.
And then I think sometimes we see them so much, sometimes we miss things. We become blind to certain things. I don't know if it's a subconscious thing. I don't know if it's because we're just caught up in I don't know what drives it, but I know that they could be sitting in front of us day after day and they could be exhibiting those warning signs and we sometimes miss them. I mean, I know that's what kind of happened to me. I think, I don't know, but it was one of those moments where I was asked, did you see the signs? And it took me a while after the event to start to piece it together as I replayed it. I'm like, oh, I did see those signs. And so teachers they take on so many different roles and to take on that. Also as a counselor, to see warning signs, we have to be aware of that and know how to act on it. And in the COVID era, it's just so much harder in the remote space, so much harder. So I feel sorry. My heart goes out to those teachers who've experienced that in the remote way. It's just, it's just a horrific thing in general, but it's, you don't want to see it fall on a teacher's hands as if they saw it, they could have done something about it. Maybe they could have, I don't know. It's a difficult issue.
And I think to Gavin's point, it's a topic that we really don't want to talk about. It's just so difficult to talk about that we think that by not talking about it, that's the solution, right? At the start of every school year, they give us the training on how to report child abuse, right? As mandated reporters, but no one talks to you about warning signs for student mental health. I think that's having to change now, right? But I'll never forget when I was a fresh new counselor right out of my graduate program. It was like, can I turn this thing off? Because my level of awareness, right, after studying human behavior for 3 years, I could look at a kid in the cafeteria and just and see something was off. And it was like, can I please turn this thing off? Yeah. I don't want to know, because I know that knowing means I have to do something, right? But I think we have to start talking about it more in a healthy, safe environment. I remember my daughter, which I thought was a brilliant idea. They trained, some teachers selected some specific high school students to be kind of, I don't want to say ambassadors, but maybe like even peer counselors. And they went through this whole maybe week-long training and they were introduced to their peers. And, you know, if you have an issue, you can talk to this student or that student. And they were kind of almost like a little bridge between the student and the counseling department. Right. And it was just another great way for kids to be able to tap their friend on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm having these feelings. And then they would have the protocols on how to kind of share that with the counselor. I'm hoping now with this COVID CARES money and so much of it being, they want schools to allocate it toward mental health for students. I certainly hope we start bringing those types of resources, programs, and conversations back on campuses.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because our university has put that in place in recent years, and it became a very important mechanism for a lot of us, because it came back down to, yeah, you could do education, you could do talks, but then sometimes firing that mechanism, launching that safety net, that first level of safety net, is sometimes daunting in an odd way. Is that, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like people want to avoid the issues, but there is that hesitation, because you're like, oh, is it me? Am I crazy? Am I seeing this? But the reality is, if you see something, say something. And then it did. Well, we saw that same thing. It was nice. It was like a peer intervention type layer. And then those peers can do a quick assessment and then pass them to the next level. So we have that in place. And I think it's working, but it's like any process. It could always be improved. So.
Right.
I think it's interesting that Gavin had mentioned when you were doing the journaling that did you say that they were then putting some of the pieces that you were writing in the guidance counselor's office?
Yeah, the intent when this teacher and I connected, and as we really got digging into writing what is essentially the book right now, her motivation, I mean, I don't know what her motivation was. I can never say what her motivation was. But one of the deals that we made was that when we finished it, she would bind 5 copies and put it into the guidance office so that kids could kind of read it and check it out. And like when we reconnected 25 years later, and I reminded her of this, she didn't really remember that. And and they kind of had vanished and they weren't there anymore. And I think it might have been me that actually went and got them and I wanted to try to promote the book somewhere else. I don't know. But I mean, it's a vague memory that we both kind of, we were both like, we did do that. Yeah. But, you know, so that was kind of her kind of deal with me, that she'd help me kind of create it. And then, but she wanted me to put a couple of copies in the guidance counselor's office. And there's one reason I'm pretty sure that is accurate, even though it's been quite some time since all this happened, is there is one classmate that did tell me that they read the binded thick version from the guidance counselor's office. And I'm like, well, there's not many of those binded thick versions out there. There were like 5 of them. So we must have put one in there, because that they had read it before it went to print and 25 years later, you know, so they got to read both copies basically. And
Gavin, can I ask,
pretty similar.
Where and when on this journey did you say, yeah, I want to be a teacher?
I said that my sophomore year in college. So it was, I mean, I'm kind of it'd be a side tangent, but I was ready to graduate college my second semester of school, because I had enough electives to graduate, but I did not have a major yet. And my folks said, you got to pick something pretty soon. And my mom said, you'd be a good teacher. And I'm like, okay, let's go with it.
Mother knows best.
Yeah. There's probably more components to that in there, but
so, yeah.
you know, essentially that I had a year as a freshman in college where I, you know, was a freshman, and then I took a semester overseas. And after that, I came back from studying in England for a semester and went to Miami of Ohio and said, all right, I had one semester where I took big classes, and then it was, you better get into something. So I became a teacher.
You're my advising nightmare.
But I mean, my dad was an educator, and I grew up, you know, so I mean, it wasn't like it was a big leap. It was
family business.
It was kind of grounded there, but I like to tell it that way.
Nice.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that story. Well, Gavin, when we get towards the end, we usually like to do a little takeaway or just something that sparked in our minds or something that we want to take away with this. And then, of course, as our guests, we'll let you kind of have the last word in. So as we go around, who should I call? How about Abley? Fred Abley? That's a good place to start. Fred, any takeaways or anything that...
So Gavin, this is what happens every time we get together. I know I'm going to go first, and I think I'm prepared, and it just falls to my shoes. I'm going to paraphrase something. So you said something. You're just a vessel. You're more than a vessel. I think that you've done a service to your community that's going to be so important for a very long time. So I like what you said, and I get what you said, but I think you underscored it in a very low key way. And I think it's something you should be, and I know you are probably very proud of for such a dark topic. The other thing though, was this notion that I think I've known this. I think we all have said this in various ways about the teacher's role in the community. It's almost like this binder. The school is that binder. And Aaron, you were kind of saying it too. It's like everything passes through the school. And I know that we've been talking about teachers taking on a bigger role after COVID, or we're having this wonderful realization right now that teachers are important. It took a global pandemic to figure that out. But the thing was that fiber is such a beautiful thing. Because I was thinking about the whole time you were saying that was my elementary school and my teachers and how much they were a part of me. Even to this day, the few that are still remaining, there's a nice woven fiber, a wholesome element to it that's so important to this country. And I think that's something we have to also bring forward as teachers to remind our communities. We're not just the place to drop off the kids. It's a place that builds so much, and I think what you said and what you did is just a great reminder of that. And that's, I'm going to be telling your story to a lot of people here coming over the next few weeks.
Letitia?
I don't have a specific quote or phrase, if you will, but I think for me, the takeaway is, we do a lot of talking about students, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. And this just showing me and reminding me how powerful kids are. We underestimate our students and we underestimate their value. And I think that Gavin kind of has reminded me about the importance of really taking stock and appreciating even our kiddos, that they have gifts. And who knew 25 years ago that he'd be leading this type of healing in his community. So let's give our kiddos some extra TLC and continue to nurture those gifts. So that's my big takeaway.
Great. And Pete?
Yeah, our schools are microcosms of the communities that surround it. So what happens in the community, it's felt sometimes harder in the school, just because of the dynamics that make up a school. There's raw emotion, there's hormones, there's all sorts of stuff. So what's going on outside the school can be felt more intensely sometimes inside those school walls. And for the teachers and for students, for everyone, every human, I can't underestimate the importance of having a creative outlet. Fill in the blank, journaling, songwriting, art. I was thinking of our past guest, Kibby. Anything to get those feelings out. You don't know. It's so beneficial, so healthy, and you have no idea how you're going to help other people in doing so as well. The ripple effects will go on forever, like we were talking about. So find that creative outlet for yourself.
Wow. I wrote down ripple effect, Pete.
What? That's a first.
I know. Yep. Just kept going back. I think a lot of us are saying the same thing. But Gavin mentioned something about the teacher that he went to that he hadn't had before. But for some reason, was drawn to them, and this person helped him to kind of work through writing this stuff out. And then even the friend that he had that was a classmate, they weren't best friends, but at the same time, they were a part of his community. And so in losing a classmate, that affected a lot of people. So it's that ripple effect again. And Pete, I just wish I could reach through the camera and hug you. I too, someone I cared about very, very, very much, passed away from suicide. And it's hard on the families, and it's hard on everyone that they left, because you're left with a lot of questions. So, as an educator, I would encourage, especially high school, since Gavin wrote this with his high school voice. What a great book that you could use to kind of open up conversations about suicide if they feel safe to do that. Or you can recommend it to parents even. So Gavin, we're just going to toss the ball to you. You're making us feel, like we need to remember that we're all a part of a community. Do you have any kind of little last bit of words that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I'm jumping in. I don't know if you noticed, but my computer cut out on you guys. So I don't know what happened there. So I don't know what I just missed you guys say, but it feels like it got pretty heavy.
You're much more handsome than your twin brother.
And I was just gonna say, for a guy who said he's not a techie, that was the most seamless return
Yes.
I've ever seen in my life. So that was fantastic.
I agree.
I don't know what happened, but my other computer just went out. So I'm like, oh, quick jump on. I don't know what I missed, but I will say this. I just want people to know that this is a message that I didn't realize how important it was until it was published, and how effective it can be. High school kids, there's never really anything from them in their own voice. Or there was when we were kids. And if we would have had, when this was going on, if they could have handed us 100 of these books and we could have read through it, and it would have forced us to have some conversations about different things that many of us probably just kind of put away in our brains and didn't want to deal with. So what I'm hoping, and I know it's already started because of the conversations that people have reached out to have with me, or I've had parents talk to me about things that are happening with their kids. I could go on, there's a lot of profound stories, and it's not just with suicide. There's other events, opioids, things like that there's so many different things going on where there's traumatic things that high school kids are dealing with, and they don't have these, sometimes they don't have the tools, and this is maybe a tool that can get them to having some of the conversations that they need to have. So I guess my goal is just to be able to get people talking, get people to open up conversations that they maybe wouldn't have otherwise. And maybe in the long run, this will help a bunch of people, a bunch of kids deal with something. And I've had adults tell me that they can now talk to their kids about some things that they couldn't talk about before, because they now at least understand a little bit about what's going on inside their head because of the voice. So I really think that high school perspective is just something that, like I said, as an author, I couldn't even understand it 25 years later, because there's certain things that I can't get in that mind. So I think it's an important, another important tool for people to try to go there and get in there.
Yeah, I think that's key, is that we all don't need to feel alone in feeling that responsibility or trying to catch things. There are tools that we can use to kind of help us with that. And Letitia, I think you wanted to share, we had some things we wanted to share about that to our listeners before we end our episode today.
Absolutely. We want everyone to take these warning signs seriously. So if you have students that are making threats, if you find notes or plans, if you've discovered prior suicidal behavior, making final arrangements where they're giving away video games and, things that are important to them, those are some warning signs. And any changes in behavior, appearance, or thoughts, their appetite changes, their sleep patterns are changing. These are all really important things to look out for. And it's better to be safe than sorry. So reaching out to your school counselor, whether you are a teacher or a parent, is super important. And of course, we want to give the Lifeline number. And this is the national hotline that's on 24/7. And you can actually get it in Spanish as well. That's 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. want to thank our listeners for hanging in there with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And Gavin, where can our listeners follow you and also buy the book?
I do have a Facebook page that they can. I had it on my other computer up, but they can search the book. There's a page for a Marshland of his own on Facebook, and then I am on Twitter. Twitter a little bit, but I'm still learning that. But I am on LinkedIn. They could connect with me on LinkedIn, and you could find the links for everything through there and connect to everything there. So multiple different ways, and then the book is available on Amazon. And then if you happen to be in my local town in Wisconsin here, local bookstore, the local bookstore, Books and Company has it, but probably Amazon would be best for your viewers.
Yeah, right now, not ready to travel yet.
That's good. All right. And Pete, where can our listeners find us, the TPR?
Hey, we've been hearing from educators, amazing educators, inspiring educators like Mr. Z here from all around the country and all around the world. We want to hear from you. Please let us know. What do you like about the show? Who's your favorite on the show? Who's your favorite? And why is it not Fred? Why is it not Fred? Let us know. What kind of episode would you like us to do? Anything like that. Hey, we're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. Mr. Fred has been doing a kick-butt job on everything we have going on with Facebook and YouTube. Check it out. Check us out on Facebook and YouTube. And also our website is teacherpeprally.com. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a review. Help us out. We would love to help expand the pep.
Very good. Thank you
Spread
so much. Thank you, Gavin. We appreciate your time and for sharing your story. Keep it up.